So I guess we want to talk a little bit about how to read an ingredient list on a label, and also maybe a little bit about the analysis. The nutritional analysis and the ingredients are sometimes counterintuitive. They sometimes don't make sense even in the context of each other. So I'll try to explain that. I have 3 different dry foods here that we will not name, but we're going to take a grocery store brand, a more prescription type brand, and one of these new grain-free brands to see what are you looking at when you're looking at the ingredients. I always look at the first top 5 ingredients to see what's in there, because those 5 ingredients are a very large majority of what is in the food. Everything in below that is going to start to get a little bit less significant. These are all adult formulas. So the grocery store one, it has chicken, it has ground whole corn, ground whole grain sorghum, which is also corn, chicken byproduct meal, and then dried plain beet pulp. So when I look at this, the thing that stands out, okay, great, the first ingredient is meat, that's awesome. But then the next 2 ingredients are highly processed grains, which is starch, which is sugar. And then chicken byproduct meal is questionable. There's a very scary definition of what that actually means in the AFCO ingredient list, which you actually do pay to get a copy of AFCO's ingredient definitions in order to see that information. So that's very confusing for consumers. Then we have dried plain beet pulp. And my biggest problem with beet pulp is, yes, it's a great source of fiber, but it is the heaviest sprayed Roundup Ready GMO'd food in the world, especially in North America. So when you see that on the ingredient list, along with corn and other grains that are highly Roundup Ready, this means that there is a hidden ingredient in the food, which is herbicides, which is not something you want to be feeding your dog every day. So you always have to keep in mind that whatever the ingredients are, how they're farmed is actually important too. That's just a little DL on the grocery store brand.
Well, and what it tells me is that likely more than 50% of the main composition of the food could actually be corn.
Yeah.
Because even though chicken appears first, it might only be slightly higher than the second and the third ingredient,
Yeah.
which means 2/3 or somewhere about there. Food is actually not meat at all, but it makes it look like that because chicken is first.
Yeah, and then the next ingredients on there are natural flavor, which is undetermined. We have no idea what that is.
I love it how you like throw the word natural in and all of us like.
And then flaxseed, dried egg product, chicken fat that's been preserved with vitamin E, basically, coloring from caramel, and then vitamins and minerals that are added. That the rest of it is all vitamin and mineral additions. And then at the very bottom, very last one is rosemary extract. So it's very healthy.
Because there's like this much of rosemary extract and.
So when you look at this, you see, yes, there is a lot of protein in there. But there's also a lot of starch. So when I go into the guaranteed analysis, all they're going to show me here is the protein level percentage, then the crude fat percentage, then the fiber percentage, which is not the same as starch. So you have to make sure that you are understanding the concept that there is no starch reading on your nutritional analysis, but you can see it in the ingredient list. So you have to be aware of that as a consumer, because they're not going to tell you that on the bag. So if you're looking to reduce the amount of sugar in your pet's diet, especially if they have some kind of inflammatory condition, we all know that that's a very inflammatory thing to be feeding your pet or yourself. So there's lots of studies showing that it promotes cancers and feeds cancer if they have cancer. So if you're trying to reduce that, you have to look at that. You can't see it on the ingredient or the nutritional analysis. You can only see it in the ingredient list. So all of the lovely smoke and mirrors of how much protein and how much fat are in the food is great, but you have to be able to decipher how much sugar you're feeding your pet as well. So that's a major, major take home when you're looking at any pet food ingredient list.
Well, and the other thing too is that if majority of that ingredient list, more than 2/3 in this case, is vitamins and minerals, then those vitamins and minerals they're not coming from the food ingredients. They're being added on because the food ingredients are so highly processed that there's no vitamins and minerals virtually left in them.
There's nothing
So
left.
think about the level of processing that chicken had to go through, and the corn and everything else had to go through, that there's literally...
There's no vitamin A, there's no vitamin E, there's no vitamin B, there's nothing in there that they have to put it all back in. So when you see a really long list of vitamin and mineral premix, it's very indicative of the quality of the actual food portion of which is the majority of what you're feeding, is that main 5 ingredients. It's so devoid that they have to add this massive list of things to sort of balance it again. So like I said in other videos, that it's very much like Frankenstein. It's very puttied back together.
It's like us eating mac and cheese and then taking multivitamins to make up for the fact that we're not eating any vegetables or fruits.
Exactly. So now we're going to look at, this is a very popular prescription, scientifically formulated, very perceived to be a very, very healthy, top brand food, premium food to feed your pets. I'm not going to name the name, but veterinarians recommend it regularly. And so we have the first 5 ingredients: corn, chicken byproduct meal, which is not chicken, brewer's rice, brown rice, and chicken fat. That's the top 5. Then dried plain bee pulp, wheat gluten, vegetable oil, fish oil, and then everything else below that is all premixed. It's very disturbing to see that this is being accepted as a very good way to feed your pet because it's primarily starch. And again, when we go and we look at the guaranteed analysis, this one, it only has the macros. It doesn't even have any of the other nutritional content. So it says the protein, the fat, and the fiber, and the moisture, and that's it. So how are you supposed to tell what you're feeding with that information? You can't. So it's an interesting one because this company in particular has a very good reputation. So they basically are saying to me as a nutritionist that they are so good at what they do that they really don't have to explain themselves, which is very frustrating for me. And then last one is a very popular grain-free brand, small type, that grain-free and raw foods are not in the same category. We have another video about that.
The principle behind grain-free is that pets should be deriving most of their nutrition from meats and some vegetation. That's how they eat in the wild, right? So because when raw first started off, a lot of the foods in the market had tons of grains in them. The core message that the raw movement started putting out is that your pet should not be eating grains, they should be eating meat. And somehow that got translated into, well, grain-free foods are better. The question isn't whether the food has grains or not. It's what's the main source of protein. So grains were put into diets because grains do contain protein. Replacing them with other equally biologically inappropriate sources of protein is still the same thing. It just gets you the title grain-free. The point that the raw movement was trying to make is feed your pets more meat and less grains and less other protein replacements, we'll call them.
All right, so this is a very popular grain-free brand. So the ingredient list, first 5 ingredients are deboned chicken, deboned turkey, Atlantic flounder, whole eggs, and whole Atlantic mackerel, which is much more appropriate for dogs. So we look down the list, there's some organ meats, dehydrated chicken and turkey and fish. And then we go into whole red lentils, whole pinto beans, whole green peas. So there's quite a lot of meat in here. And in the protein is very high, so it's 38%. You'll probably see like between 13 and 20% in most of the other adult foods that we were looking at. So it's higher in protein, which is great, because that is a more species appropriate protein or macronutrients, energy for dogs. But the chickpeas and the lentils and the navy beans and all of those legumes, the red lentils, pinto beans, they are, in our minds, yes, they're very healthy foods for people. But dogs and cats don't eat those things. And there's a reason why they don't eat those things. And when you start to look at the amino acid profiles, which are the little chains that make up proteins, they're very, very different from meat proteins. So humans can live very solidly on plant-based proteins and live a vegetarian life and do pretty well. But dogs and cats can't do that. There's some argument about dogs, but I do feel that you have to do some supplementation if you're going to just feed plant-based proteins. So the amino acid profile is very, very different. The other thing that is an issue with highly heat-treated lentils is they become very starchy, just like grains do. So when you're looking at processed foods, again, there's no real way to see how much starch is in this food. So that's one of my main concerns about feeding grain-free that still has some starch in it, because there's no analysis on any diet that will tell you how much starch is in the food. So you actually have to look at it and try and figure it out, get a ballpark, which is not really that fair, because it should be very clearly labeled, and it's just not. So that's, this food is a much more expensive dry food. It's definitely a step up. It has vegetables in it. It has very short premix, vitamin mineral premix profile, and it also has some probiotics added in there as well. So if you're looking at using a better food, I definitely think this one would be a much more viable option for longer term for pets. I still would want to add some fresh food to this, so broth, eggs, vegetables, those types of things would bring up the nutrition level. I probably also want to add some real cooked meat at least.
And water.
And water and broth. Yeah, because that's one of the main reasons why the dry food is hard on them, is because there's no water in it. That's kind of getting off the topic of comparing them. This one also gives you a much better version of what is actually in the food, because it doesn't just give you the macros, it gives you the protein, the fat, the fiber, the moisture. It even gives you the DHA and EPA profile, which is the omega-3 fats, calcium, phosphorus, and some of the other, like chondroitin, which is amazing that they even did that analysis. So they, looking at this, I can see that they really care about what they're putting into their food. So that, I can't say that all dry foods are bad. There are some that are way more nutritious. It's just the concept of feeding that one thing every day and getting balance is still not logical. So you still have to either rotate within this brand, like a red meat one and then a poultry one and then a fish one, or start to add some fresh food in, because that really is the best way to get more of those phytonutrients and the enzymes and the things that AFCO doesn't even recognize as an essential ingredient, because that's also part of those missing puzzle pieces. And like we say every day, it's a process, and you have to be able to vary it and explore with it to create a balanced diet. It's not about just sticking some stuff in a bowl. So that's kind of just a little DL on how to look at ingredient lists, and then looking at the analysis as well. So you can kind of put the two together and get a general idea of the food value by doing this. But if you're looking at something and they're saying it's scientifically formulated, et cetera, and it's balanced and complete, all you have to do is look at the ingredients and look at the analysis, and you can get a pretty good idea. And if you don't know, then you can always ask.
And I think your point about, if you're trying to really achieve a healthy, balanced diet, you got to feed more than one food. And both rotating through dry food, adding fresh food, none of them are mutually exclusive. And rather than worrying about, is this going to be balanced or not if I add this or that, focus on that variety, because in nature balance comes from variety. And the more variety we can provide our pets, the more diversity they have in their digestive system and their gut flora, and that's what provides them with the balance they need to stay healthy and gets them into homeostasis. No one food can do that, no matter how great the ingredient list is. And that's true for dry food, it's true for raw food, it's true for any food on this planet, except maybe astronaut food.